into the dust.
Right, so this story is actually arguably not even archaeology at all, but I will get into that later. So a little known fact of history is that in the 16th, 17th, and 18th century, there was a big chunk of the slave trade that involved Europeans, but not as the enslavers. They were the enslaved. And the perpetrators in this case were from Africa. They were the feared pirates of the North African Barbary coast. Estimates of the number of European slaves taken during these centuries range from hundreds of thousands to over 1 million. Now, one of the centers of this trade was Algiers, which still exists today under that name, and that was the center of a semi-independent state nominally under the wing of the Ottoman Empire. For example, from just 1621 to 1627, Algiers alone captured more than 20,000 slaves, representing a veritable United Nations of enslaved people, including folks from the Netherlands, Belgium, Scotland, England, France, Denmark, Ireland, Hungary, China, Japan, Brazil, Ethiopia, Syria, Egypt, and those are just some of the places these folks came from. In the 15th and 16th century, the city even had its own internationally infamous and feared pirate leader, local governor, Hayreddin Barbarossa. And now a pirate named Barbarossa, where have we heard that before?
So tell me, what's become of my ship?
And these Barbary pirates were major players in international affairs. You see, I visited both the island of Vestmannaeyjar off of Iceland and also Skansen Fort in the Faroe Islands capital of Tórshavn. Now, what do these two places have in common other than they're both sort of in Scandinavia? Well, both of them are really far from the Barbary states, and both of them suffered slave raids by Barbary pirates, both in 1609, one in 1627 and 1629, and in those, whole villages were carted off into slavery. And believe it or not, from 1801 to 1805, a newly independent United States under President Thomas Jefferson fought its first foreign war against the Barbary pirates. Anyway, you get the picture. The Barbary pirates were
kind of a big deal.
And so was a recent shipwreck find. You see, I think this is the first example of an excavated Barbary pirate corsair, as their feared raiding ships were known. First discovered in 2005 at a depth of 2,700 feet or 825 meters, this was in the Western Mediterranean in between Spain and Morocco, and it was a small ship that was found, only about 14 meters or 45 feet. Now, that was almost 20 years ago, but these things are normally kept under wraps for quite a while to avoid, shall we say, competitive excavations. Well, first, the artifacts. It was laden with objects, but mostly a lot of pottery. And some of this pottery came from Belgium or Germany, Turkey, but actually a lot of it was made right in Algiers. So that was clue number one. And clue number two, the pottery dated the shipwreck to around 1760, a high point for Barbary piracy, though of course some radiocarbon dating of the hull and other things could help calibrate that date range. However, the dead giveaway, this little ship was laden with guns, muskets, cannons, swivel guns, perfect for this little guy to unthreateningly approach a much larger ship and suddenly bust out the guns for a sneak attack. And fortunately, given that the finds were pretty commonplace, mostly just some pottery, it's likely that the cargo or the intended cargo would have been, you guessed it, slaves. Now, remember at the beginning I said that this story arguably wasn't even archaeology? Well, why not? You see, the company that located the wreck and did the research was called Odyssey Marine Exploration out of Florida. And this is not an archaeological company. Their business seems concerned mostly with finding valuable resources like gold and phosphate underwater. So this would put the project squarely in the wreck and treasure hunting kind of space. Now, archaeologists have a range of opinions on this sort of thing, but I think it's fair to say it is overwhelmingly negative. You see, wreck hunters are like metal detectorists. There are good ones who cooperate with authorities, record their data to a high standard, report their findings. For example, like Terry Herbert, our friend who found the Staffordshire hoard. But there are also bad ones who just plunder sites and sell the stuff on the open market. And then there's also international law, which is actually pretty messy in this space, because it involves both salvage law and UNESCO's Convention on Underwater Cultural Heritage, as well as general archaeology principles and heritage law. And those two things, salvage law and the heritage law, often directly conflict. Depending on exactly where the wreck was found, Spain, Morocco, or Algeria all could have potentially had some role in saying what should have happened to it. And the fundamental principle of that UNESCO convention, and really archaeology in general, is that the underwater heritage and other types of heritage should be left alone unless specifically threatened, in which case you can go in and record the information and then recover certain things. And that's totally inimical to wreck hunting, which is all about recovering things. In fact, I got a lot of the information and images for this segment from Wreck Watch magazine, an article in that publication. Now, that's obviously not archaeology, and to be honest, although there was some archaeology done here, like pottery analysis, I'm not even sure if any professionally trained archaeologists were involved, and I have no idea how thoroughly they recorded their data. No, I'm not casting any aspersions because I really don't know anything about Odyssey marine exploration or where exactly the wreck was found. But you can see I've got questions, and this is why a lot of archaeologists kind of generally get pissed off about this kind of stuff. But you know, to be honest, I'm not really 100% sure where I stand on all these issues. You see, there are so many wrecks out there that go unexplored, because there's not nearly enough funding or archaeological bandwidth to study them. And if it just sits at the bottom to decay and people don't really get a chance to learn anything from it, what good does it do down there? On the other hand, if a wreck is sitting down there in a very good state of preservation, not threatened, and then a bunch of wreck hunters come along and plunder it and then nobody learns about it, what good does that do anyone other than the wreck hunters? So I'm really not saying it's good or bad. I'm saying, like everything in archaeology, it's complicated. Why don't you let me know what you think down in the comment section? Today's site visit goes to show you that you often find archaeology where you least expect it. You see, I recently went on a little road trip. And while I wasn't exactly expecting the Netflix version of gunfights and boat chases, I sort of had in mind beaches, sun, and oysters. But what I got instead were some really cool experiences up close and personal with community archaeology. So let's dive right in.
On to 180, 34 years of age, Jeremy Wells!
The Outer Banks Islands are basically narrow spits of barrier islands along the coast of North Carolina and southern Virginia. In many places, they're no more than a few blocks wide. Now, on the west side, you have the inland waterways, marshy, swampy areas that are perfect for hunting, fishing, boating. And on the east side, facing the ocean, you've got long stretches of sandy beaches and sand dunes. The rough seas, rising sea levels, hurricanes, and lapses in coastal management make these islands, many of which are little more than glorified sandbars, particularly vulnerable to erosion, and some have disappeared altogether over the years. For example, Portsmouth Village was abandoned altogether in the 1970s after many years of declining fortunes due in large part to the shifting sands. It's an eerie place that you can visit on a private tour, though the rough seas often make the voyage too treacherous to undertake. And of course, up the coast a ways is Kitty Hawk, where brothers Orville and Wilbur Wright made the first airplane flight in 1903. Definitely something you're going to want to see if you're an aviation fan, though honestly, I've spent so much of my life in planes, I don't know whether to be thankful for that or what. Anyway, you get the idea. Lots to do and see. Now, I'm going to focus on two bits of history that I bet a lot of people don't even know are here, and these go a long way in defining the early colonial period in America. The golden age of piracy, particularly in the person of Blackbeard, perhaps the most famous pirate of all, and the so-called lost colony of Roanoke. Let's start first with the pirate stuff. The Outer Banks were the stomping grounds of this feared pirate Blackbeard and his flagship Queen Anne's Revenge.
With their heads!
The ship was reputed to have been a prize that Blackbeard won off of some French victims who he raided, though in actuality he only sailed it for about a year. Now, just like this, the dreaded pirate has a lot of lore around him, some of it true, some of it not. He was a tall, imposing man, and to strike fear into his enemies, he lit slow-burning fuses into his beard and around his broad-brimmed hat, taking on an almost demonic quality. But he was neither the most successful nor the most vicious of pirates. But an effort to sell some more books in the 1700s, all the way through to Hollywood production, has led to his reputation becoming a little overblown.
But you have heard of me.
However, Blackbeard has definitely left his mark in these parts. Now, the Queen Anne's Revenge was discovered in Beaufort Inlet in 1996. And there is a decades-long salvage operation going on to rescue all the different bits of the ship. And like many of these wrecks, unfortunately, a raging legal battle ongoing in the courts, even until today. Okay, well, maybe not that vicious, but there is a lot of money at stake, so it has gotten a bit ugly. Examination of the remaining portions of the hull reveal that it was built in a French style, corroborating those tales about the ship's origin. Most of the cannon have been recovered along with thousands of artifacts, which you can actually see in two different places. First, the laboratory where they're being conserved in Greenville, North Carolina, about 2 hours away. And this is open to monthly tours and bespoke tours for groups and scholars. And then there's also the North Carolina Maritime Museum in Beaufort, not far from where the wreck was found. Now, I'm going to bring you to those places in an upcoming site visit, but what I'm covering today was a visit that had a much more intimate feel to it, and that would be on Ocracoke Island. Ocracoke is a small island community that first thrived in the 1700s, and what the people there did was acted as pilots, unloading the cargo from large ocean-going vessels and then piloting it through the treacherous inland waters to the markets like New Bern that were inland, and they did this on much smaller boats that could navigate those waters. However, Ocracoke's most famous resident, from whom a lot of the islanders today descend, his name was William Howard. Now, he bought the whole island in 1759 and lived there until his death in the 1790s at the ripe old age of 108 years old. Now, it's not proven, but it's strongly believed that he is the same William Howard who served as quartermaster for Blackbeard on Queen Anne's Revenge. Now, if you want to explore this topic more thoroughly, I'll put a link below to an extended story about this. Now, that William Howard, the pirate, fortunately for him, he quit the pirating business early enough to receive an amnesty. And this was a Hail Mary for him because it supposedly arrived the night before he was due to hang. And that came from King George I, a guy not exactly famous for his mercy.
Execution, 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 execution. Tough guy. Must be. Pardon, somewhere. Let's see. Ah, one left. We're lucky.
So his life was spared. So when you go to Ocracoke, you'll find a lot of people named Howard. And something else you'll find, though you have to look a little bit for it, is the Ocracoke brogue. Now that's the dialect spoken by the locals, but like all such dialects, as more and more people are coming in and people from the island are moving to the mainland, it's slowly dying out. In fact, it's due to be extinct in the next 40 to 50 years unless something changes. After all, what allowed the dialect to survive for so long in the first place was the island's isolation. Now, when you hear it, you're going to hear a little bit English, a little bit Southern, and a little bit pirate.
What told on the signs of last night water, Friday night moonshine, no fish.
So I asked around to find out where I could hear this brogue, and I was pointed invariably to Chester Lynn, the local historian, antiques dealer, and gardener, famous for selling the local fig tree, of which there are more than a dozen varieties.
I'm from Ocracoke. I am the 10th generation in my family from Ocracoke. That goes back to the mid-1600s.
Chester Lynn is the proprietor of Annabelle's Antiques right in Ocracoke town, font of local wisdom, and strong advocate for its island and its culture. And he is the keeper of a few precious artifacts from Blackbeard's exploits on the island, albeit not gold or diamonds. His collection includes mostly domestic items like some pewter plates, some pipes and drinking vessels, and cannonballs. According to Chester and some of the other locals, Springer's Point, where there's a small nature preserve just west of Ocracoke town, well, that was a favorite haunt for Blackbeard, due to the fact that there was a natural well there so he would get water, and that was actually still visible in living memory, though it no longer exists. And that's just where Chester's collection was found, on Springer's Point. And researchers working on that Blackbeard collection I mentioned before, well, they confirm that the pieces in Chester's collection do match those from Queen Anne's Revenge. So here you have a great example of community archaeology and oral history working together to confirm a point that adds to the Blackbeard story. I love it when that happens. And equally important, the story of this community, which really is a strange bit of living history in and of itself, is enriched by the archaeology too. Thus, the tales that Blackbeard hung out here are very likely true, and also that the inhabitants of the island are all descendants of what we would call his senior leadership team. You see, there's some historical record from the early 1700s, so that would have been before Howard bought the island, of a reverend from the mainland visiting Ocracoke and finding that the inhabitants were a mixture of Native American Indian and Europeans. So the thinking is that these were descendants from the inhabitants of that lost colony of Roanoke, but you're going to hear all about that in the second part of my site visit. Well, I heard about a project trying to find the lost colony using modern DNA, and they're doing this by collecting the DNA of people descended from the local Native American tribe called the Croatoans, as well as people who have roots in Ocracoke going back to the 18th or 17th centuries. While I don't know specifically, I'm pretty sure some of the local Ocracokers would have taken part in this study, which will hopefully reveal something about the fate of the lost colony. Hey, if you like what you heard, give me that thumbs up below, hit that bell to subscribe, or if you want to support more independent archaeology content, consider contributing to my Patreon, where you can enjoy some exclusive members-only benefits and other goodies. Until the next dig.